Hi everyone, this is Takatoshi Shibayama, the host of the Future Design Podcast. This podcast looks to empower listeners with perspectives on how we can challenge the social norm and evolve with better understanding of philosophy, spirituality, and ethics. Empowered individuals can have much stronger voice and influence in bringing about revolutionary changes in the world, whether you're building businesses or technologies. My guests and I speak about social constructs that are commonly accepted in the world today that's not working anymore, and how to rebuild them with ethical values to create a better future. In this episode, I speak with Mark Ryall, who is an independent researcher of gene editing and an author of the book Age Decoded. For centuries, we have been pushing the boundaries of life extension by inventing medicine and improving medical practices, which I'm all for, especially in this time of pandemic of COVID-19. If a disease can be cured and minimize human suffering, I welcome it with open arms. But what if that extends to eternal life? Is really aging a disease or a malfunction of our genes, or are we supposed to die? So many have dreamed of infinite life, but I wonder if it is worth it. We discuss about the technologies of CRISPR and what can potentially happen to us human beings if we drink from this fountain of youth. So without further ado, here is Mark Ryall. Future Design Podcast. Thank you very much for being on the show. Welcome to the Future Design Podcast.
Thank you, Taka. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm humbled to be on your show.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. So you wrote a book called Age Decoded, which talks about CRISPR and how the world, well, it's more of a science fiction novel, where you created a world where people live 200, 300 years, and you talk about people living in that world, which I find it really interesting. And before we dive into those CRISPR and gene editing topics and how we create a world around that, could you tell us, who is Mark Ryall?
Sure. I just retired from 25 years of teaching, so I love teaching. I love working with young people. I taught economics, actually, and I also love coaching. My main coaching area was cross-country running, which is a pretty tough sport for a lot of kids, and we tried to build up a lot of sort of team aspect to it and trying to make sure every runner felt important, and it was a real team thing, not just running the race on your own. So that was sort of my background. This is my first book. I'm not really I don't consider myself a writer. I guess I am now. And with teaching, I guess I sort of got into more spiritual, more artistic things in my later career, and I also started doing some art. And but I wrote this book about 10 years ago, and it's now being published. I have a second book I'm working on now too. So I guess I have an artistic side to me that's been sort of clawing to come out, and so hence this novel. Yes.
Right. Well, definitely you're more than artistic, because you dove into this technology called CRISPR, or gene editing, and discovering how people can extend their lives. And I've tried to pick up this topic quite a lot, but it was very difficult for me to find the right person to talk to. In a way, because you wrote a sci-fi novel, it makes it much easier for the layman to read it, and I found it very easy to kind of go through the pages and read it. So for the listeners, could you give us a short synopsis of the book so that we can kind of understand what you wrote about?
Yeah, so the book looks at two parts of genetic engineering. I mean, there's so many things that could be impacted by this, but I took one psychological trait and one physical trait just to really give people an idea of what could happen. And my characters were grappling with the effects throughout the novel. So the psychological thing that I felt was impacted was people's ability to criticize, and that happened to them without them knowing it. So that's sort of like the corruption thing that gives the novel a twist. Every novel needs a good corrupt story, right? So their brains were affected using genetic engineering so that they could not criticize as effectively, criticize the government or anything as effectively. They didn't know that. The second thing that they did know about, and they all went for, was a physical effect, which is using genetic engineering to stop aging and even reverse it. So all of this stuff goes out about 230 years in the novel. And these things, I actually believe, could be possible given enough time and given the research that's even going on right now. They're looking into these things. So that's what the novel does, and I think. I can quote a few characters maybe later on, but it's the nice thing about science fiction is you can really get a feeling through the characters what the impacts are. It's, rather than nonfiction, we just read about the science. Here, you get to feel and imagine what people, what they might think could happen, why they might go for things, and then why they might have some caution about some things, and why they might even regret. Some things that have gone on. So, yeah.
And by profession, you were never a scientific researcher at all, but you made a lot of effort.
No, well, actually, I did do interesting. I did do a science degree, but my PhD is I'm not a genomicist or a genetic engineering scientist. My PhD is in education, and I have a master's in business. So I'm sort of an eclectic person in terms of background. But I started studying this about 10 years ago, reading, just like you, reading what I can and picking up what I can from various articles. And so much has come out that, like, every day I'm discovering new things that are on the frontier of this, frontier even right now happening, of this science. So, I think it's, my goal is just to teach people like I've learned myself, because I do think it's going to be a tsunami of, this is a huge break with history. If I could just slow down a bit, so far in human history, what we have done is we have become pretty good at nurturing each other, not changing human nature, but just nurturing humans. And that's good, improve medicine, life expectancy, education systems, social services, exercise, diet, nutrition. All of those things have improved immensely, and we've made some mistakes along the way, but we've done a pretty good job of nurturing other humans. But this is going to be a break with history. This is literally going to be changing human nature. And to me, that's an immense step into the unknown. We are going to change the very essence of what it means to be a human being.
The research that you've done on a topic, could you go a little bit more in detail on what you discovered? We'd like to know a little bit more about the science behind this CRISPR and gene editing.
There are a lot of exciting developments going on with CRISPR. CRISPR is the current technology, the leading technology, but this could change. In 20 years, there might be something completely different that comes out. But CRISPR will allow scientists or doctors or whatnot to change the DNA code, to edit it, to change it, perhaps permanently, but also I'm just finding out about CRISPR. They call it CRISPR on and CRISPR off, which will enable scientists to temporarily change your DNA and then flip it back if they don't like the consequences. So it's the science is still emerging. There's even now I'm reading about anti-CRISPR, which will protect people against CRISPR in case maybe there's a bioterrorism thing. Somebody uses CRISPR to create a virus, 100 times worse than COVID. You would use the anti-CRISPR to protect all human beings from that virus. So, there are so many things going on, and the impacts you could classify them as in various ways. But there's one author here in Canada. Her name is Françoise Balise, from Halifax, Dalhousie University. She just published a book called Altered Inheritance, and she does a pretty good job of sort of delineating the different effects. But one is definitely prevention of disease. I mean, there's huge possibilities with cystic fibrosis, Alzheimer's disease, sickle cell anemia, blindness, HIV, Huntington's. All of those are horrible afflictions, and they do believe they'll be able to use CRISPR. Actually, they've already started with sickle cell, and with blindness. They've started that, where they literally start changing your genetic code to try to treat So that's treatment. And I think ethically, most people wouldn't have too much problem with that as an application. So Francois Balise talks about, the treatment side, not too ethically immoral or potentially immoral. But then there's also the enhancement. So there's the possibility that just like athletes use steroids right now, that athletes and others, and this is just one example, where they might use genetic engineering to make themselves stronger, or faster, or taller. It's quite possible. And then you could even have designer babies where parents are using CRISPR genetic engineering or genetic selection to choose offspring with certain characteristics, including things like intelligence, creativity. I mean, there's a whole gamut of things, physical and psychological. So that gets into a little bit of questionable territory where people are saying, hold on, should we really be doing that? Is that good use of public resources and science? And should we be favoring certain characteristics over others? And also, who will have access to that? Probably more the wealthy people who can pay for it right off the bat. And then the third stage, the most troublesome one, is the one I mentioned before, where you have unscrupulous human beings who could potentially use CRISPR for evil or really unwanted reasons. Such I mentioned bioterrorism. That would probably be the worst case scenario.
Who are usually on this research that are considering the ethical values of what we're doing? Because even in your book, there was a scientist that was working on, creating this life extension program, and in the end, her work has been taken away from her and into the hands of politicians and etc. And she was struggling with all the ethical consequences of what she's doing. And then, so are there anybody on these teams that are actually developing these things, thinking about these ethical values? And actually, who is to say that that person or the group of people are actually, the referees, so to say, of the ethical value of consideration?
Right. Going back to Francois Balise, and there's also another person, Jodie Halpern from UC Berkeley. I'd recommend to listeners, and she's got an ethical team set up at that university. But back to Francois Balise, her book, Altered Inheritance. She talks a lot about the committees and commissions and that are set up. So, for example, there was a committee that it was really a summit in 2015 in Washington of a lot of the world leaders in genetics who came together, and they issued a declaration saying, if we're going to do this stuff, it's got to be safe, it's got to be effective. And also, a really important thing they threw in there, it has to have a broad consensus. And not just scientists, not just politicians, but business people, common citizens, doctors, a broad consensus. So that's one example. If you even going right back to the Hippocratic Oath, 3000 BC, it stated that if you're going to do medicine, you make sure it doesn't hurt people. Make sure it helps people. But then going past World War II, we had the Nuremberg Code, which talked about the treatment of humans, and then more recently there's a UN commission that's set up to deal with this, and they also even had a committee on it's a long-winded name. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but it's something on the biological use of the human germline editing, and it took place just 2 or 3 years ago, and it had all the leaders from the academies of science, the United States, UK, and others on, and they also, similar to that summit I mentioned, talked about having a consensus. But Taka, I have to be honest, this is a little bit like trying to, again, get athletes to not take steroids. You can try, but this is it's not a world government, and nobody necessarily has to listen to these committees and commissions and their declarations. It's a little bit like, I've compared to controlling nuclear technology. The world has tried, and we've done pretty good job, but it's, there's still nuclear weapons out there, and there's still nations that have never signed the non-proliferation treaties, and there's 9 nations, I believe, that have nuclear weapons, and this is the next technology, and it's going to need to be controlled. It's not going to be easy, though. I don't see it as being totally controllable. So.
Yeah, like all technologies, it's really up to the humans to decide how they want to treat this. And of course, you can have ethical board councils talking about it, but at the same time, there are no enforcements of it. There's no penalties for doing the wrong thing. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of, or potentially countries or governments that are looking to use this technology to better their society in a right way and maybe in a wrong way as well. And when we kind of unleash this kind of powerful technology into this world, what I really am concerned about first and foremost is not about how they're going to use it, but taking a step back and thinking why we're actually needing this to begin with. I understand the disease part, but if you want to start enhancing yourself, there's no boundaries, right? Because you can push this forward and forward as much as you want. I mean, throughout history, even thinking about, let's say, abortion for that sense. I mean, that was something that was considered unethical long time ago. And then we kind of pushed the boundaries and said, well, women have rights to decide whether they want to have babies or not. We pushed that boundary. You could justify anything in order to enhance yourself or say that I have a right to do X. So, where do we actually kind of really roll that back and say, is this really good or bad? I mean, it's so fuzzy that I can't see us as humans not being able to justify what we want to do. And I see this over and over again with many other things. It's not about technology. It's about everything.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree. It's fuzzy. It's exciting, though. I mean, I really do think there will be a lot of huge benefits and breakthroughs with this. I can just give you one example. Again, that you could say we're sort of playing with nature here, and we are, but they just released some mosquitoes in the Florida Keys, and they're genetically modified, and they're supposed to be, they just released them like this week, I think, after much environmental assessment and whatnot and testing in Brazil. But now they're released in the Florida Keys, and it's a private corporation with assistance from research from the universities. But these mosquitoes will, through generations, wipe out the other mosquitoes that are causing disease, not malaria, but several other diseases in that area. It's an invasive mosquito, and it's going to theoretically eradicate that disease causing mosquito. So it's not just human beings. They'll be using this to influence other living creatures. Maybe another interesting example, I was reading that with the coral reefs. A lot of people are quite worried about us losing the coral reefs with global warming and the effect of temperature on coral. And they believe that they can genetically modify coral and do another one. They're called gene drives when they do this with the mosquitoes or with coral. They could gene drive a new type of coral that's more temperature resistant and save the coral reef.
Actually, in Singapore, they also released that type of mosquito as well. We have in Singapore quite a lot of cases, and very frequently dengue is pretty widespread. So the government released these mosquitoes so that it doesn't carry this disease around and people getting affected. So obviously we are trying to modify nature around us so that it suits us. And that's the scary part of things, is that, nature does what it's supposed to do. It doesn't have any purpose. It doesn't have any, agenda over anything, and it should be left as it is, in my view. But because we want to be the superior sentient beings of this world, that we allow ourselves to modify nature around us. So what's to say that we're not going to modify ourselves so that we continue being this superior sentient being? And what are the consequences of doing that, right? And then I guess this can follow right into your book, and probably why you wrote this book to begin with. Is like, how do human beings change when they start to be able to bypass the laws of nature and become these superior beings?
Yeah, and it was really neat because once I started thinking about aging as some people think of it as a disease. I don't think of it that way, but many researchers do. And taking that one variable, which is so alluring, the idea that, okay, I'm not going to grow any older. Maybe I can even grow younger, you know. And if you offered that people, as you know in my book, I offered it for free, and it's only about a 30-minute procedure. So it's publicly available. And, you know, a lot of people go for it. And I think a lot of your listeners would think hard about it, but might go for it. It's so enticing as a human being, because you know, like my parents right now are old. They're in their mid-80s, and my father's got cancer, and my mother is dealing with her health issues too. But I mean, thank God they're still alive, and it's tough. And if you offered to them, you know, hey, you can start getting younger, you can start moving back to your 60s, 50s, 40s, they might go for it. I mean, why not? So it's so alluring. But you know, they're in one, as you know, one of my characters in my book is a pretty thoughtful Buddhist-like fellow named Jesus, ironically, and he is often pontificating and ruminating over these things. He's himself quite old. He's locked into the age of 76 and pretty frail. And he went for age decoding, so his age doesn't get any older. But like he says, I'm at the precipice of death. I'm just staring at it, and he really doesn't like that after a while. And then he's grappling when they bring out reverse aging, where you can get younger. He's grappling with, should I even do that? I mean, should I tinker any more with my natural flow? And he, if you don't mind, I'd like to quote one thing that Jesus says that sort of just captures this whole thought. If I could find it. Jesus, he talks about. There's a quotation. It's from Anonymous, and Jesus says, "The thief to be most wary of is the one who steals your time." He's quoting Anonymous there. But then Jesus continues. He says, "With age decoded, I believe it's the opposite. I think the thief to be wary of is the one who lends you too much time. They steal your humanity." And that's what Jesus is grappling with, is, you know, am I living forever? Is that really humanity? Is that being human? Is that right? There's one other quote, if you don't mind. There's another character who's Jesus's granddaughter. And if you don't mind, I'd like to have your listeners get a feel for how she is interpreting all this. She has her grandfather, Jesus. Her mother is that scientist that you mentioned, and she's been entrapped by the government and taken away. She thinks her mother killed herself, but actually her mother has been captured and taken for 200 years. Her father left her over that whole event. So she has no father, no mother, the grandfather who's frozen at 77. And this character, Ximena, is stuck at 25 years old. And she's never going to have children, because in this future society, of course, children are going to be so rare and almost impossible to have. So she says, she's really just speaking to herself. And she says, "I'm stuck in one egotistical dimension. I'm alone. What's it like to nurture a baby, to bring up a child, to see it walk and talk for the very first time? What's it like to listen to a son or a daughter tell stories about school and friendships, and to grow old witnessing them mature into adults, companions, and caregivers? What's it like to fully experience the cycle of life with loved ones? I'll never know the joy of being a real mother like women were in the old days. If I did know it, it would come in some artificial way." So there's two characters, one really old one and one really young one, who are really struggling after 200 years, is stuck in this state of not growing older.
Yeah. So one thing is that this old man is stuck at 76, which is probably not a great age to be stuck with, to be honest, because you're not as youthful and full of energy. You're just an old man at 76, with this same capabilities of any 76-year-old, but living forever, right? So, the I guess the thing about that is that you can, yeah, sure, great, you could live forever, but you're going to be stuck in that same situation. But what I think about, even with the other character as well, is so if you're going to live 200, 300 years, are you going to value yourself? Are you going to value your time? I just feel like there's going to be a lot of people who just says, well, I'm going to live for 300 years, so why should I really work hard right now or care about this person or that person? Because over 300 years, I could meet so many different people, and I'm just probably not gonna really care about the other person anyway. How are we going to be able to really look at time in a way that we do right now, if we live that long, right? Some people are maybe very motivated and think, well, I'm gonna change the world. People like Elon Musk talk about it, or probably a lot of entrepreneurs. I think they're the people who are always on the front line saying they want to extend their life and vouch for this technology. But what about the rest of the people who are not that motivated and they can live 200, 300 years? I mean, what does that tell us about our value of time?
Yeah, I in my book I bring in the condition called immortality ennui. So some people just after a while lose all interest, and they end up going to these things called specter societies where they can just commit suicide legally. And so that ennui, that's a possibility. But also in my book, I have a bit of fun on it. Some people have like 17 PhDs because they get bored with sort of what their first PhD and they try another one. There's lots of time to do these things, right? So yeah, immortality. I don't know. I don't know how natural it is, and I don't know if I would go for it. But I do think, I wrote the book because really for the young people out there. I mean, I know a lot of my readers are middle-aged or even a little older like me, baby boomers, whatnot. But I am getting a lot of younger readers who are reading, and those are the ones, people in their 20s, 30s, even maybe high teens, who might be affected much more by some of this when they're my age. A lot is going to happen in the next half a century, I would say. Yeah.
If we get it, I'm probably going to be like in my 90s or something if it's in 15 years, 50 years. So, for me, there's probably no point of actually getting it because I don't want to be stuck at 90 years forever. And I think a lot of the people, even the younger people, or even if I think about my kids, that they're going to be stuck at 25 forever, right? And what I worry about also is that there's no rejuvenation of society either, because we're going to be stuck with the same 8 billion people forever, which is really horrifying, because you need new people into this world, right? Where with new ideas, because even if you're 25, you're probably 200 years old, in real time. So that means that their ideas become older and older as well, and there's no fresh things coming out, right? There's no new young people, because it's not about the physical looks of who you are, right? It's about having younger people coming into this world with new ideas, new views about life. I mean, even if you look at, you just mentioned about boomers, but you look at the different types of people in each generation. The mentality is so different because you live through different economic backdrops and political backdrops as well, right? I look at Gen Zs or millennials and think, they're very much more, open about it. Ideas are more like inclusive minded than we are in Gen Xers and above. And that needs to happen over time. If we're stuck with the same 8 billion people, what does that do for humanity?
Yeah, that's so well said, Tak. I really like the way you put that. In the character Jesus in my book says something interesting. Again, he's Buddhist. He says the illusion of permanence. The illusion of permanence is going to cause suffering, more suffering than it'll eliminate. So, in my book, I have this one scene where the it's the idea of the different generations, the diverse generations and viewpoints and ages and young and old and children and grandchildren and grandparents. All of that is going to be lost because, if you have no more young people and all the old people start reverse aging, everybody's going to be 25 or 30 years old, like you say, right? So, and then you're going to be stuck with that group pretty much permanently. And and I have this one sort of metaphorical scene where there's a soccer game going on, and there are a few young people still in the society. So they're playing this game. The kids are like 12-year-olds, and adults come in to watch them because it's such a rarity to see children. So they can actually pay to adopt a child and cheer for them for an hour. They pay a pretty good fee for that, just so they can feel like they're a parent again. And the children play, and during the game, there's the soccer pitch has on the edge of the soccer pitch, there's a fence line, and on the other side of the fence, there's a graveyard, and there's hundreds of old gravestones of older people who had died, and in that scene, there's this sort of interplay between the lithe, the young children who look over and see the stones, and they respect those stones because they know what those stones represent, which is the older generations who had disappeared, and the young people have almost disappeared too. So there's sort of this mutual respect from the old and the young during that soccer game, with those little peers and glances from the young people towards the old gravestones.
Yeah, and I really think that, actually seeing death or knowing that you're going to die, you're going to try to make your life better, right? Because your life is finite. It's not infinite. So you know that if you want to make some kind of difference or some value, purpose in your life, you try to make that happen. And if you think you're going to live for 200, 300 years, push that back, right? I mean, or why even care if it's, or even and more so if it's infinite. And so I kind of feel like, we just could be stuck with people who are just, jellyfishing through life, thinking, and it's going to go on forever, so why make an impact right now? Who cares? And that's kind of the moral concern I have, probably at the top of the list, because if we don't value our time, if you don't value our life, you're not going to do anything about it, right? And that's from a point of view that we are a generation that knows that life is going to end at some point. But if you're starting out with kids right now and then stop them at a certain age and not having them really understand the concept of death and having them live forever is also extremely dangerous as well.
I don't think I would have written the book if I knew I would live till I was 1,000 or something. And actually, I don't think a lot of artists would produce their art because whether it's a book or a piece of music or an artistic piece behind here, this is something my wife drew. That's going to live after her. That's a legacy, and she's so motivated to do that because she knows her life is finite. But those things we pass on again to other generations through your legacy, your art is precious, and I don't think people would be as motivated as artists even to think of life as being an art. You're creating you're trying to create a masterpiece or a piece. That's your life, right? And I just don't think they'd be as motivated. But I more or lless agree with you on that. Although I try not to be too negative, and I try not to, like, the novel I wrote is a little dystopian, as you know, but it ends not so badly. It's got some nice things happen in the end. But I think we need to be very cautious about the power of genetic engineering.
But on the flip side, let's say that there is a good value of living forever. I mean, what kind of things can you think of? Because obviously there are many people on the other side thinking that, yes, aging is actually a flaw, is a genetic flaw, or it's a disease, and we should be living much longer, much younger as well. So what do you think are the benefits of that?
Yeah, well, a lot of diseases are related to old age. So if you think of old age as disease, there's a whole concoction of other things that go with it, like cancer and Alzheimer's, and they seem to be genetically related. So if you could eliminate aging, and there's a lot of research going on right now in Japan, Europe, and the United States, for sure, on this, and even try to reverse it, you would eliminate a lot of other conditions associated, and you would definitely eliminate a lot of ailments. So that's good. I think that's nice. Yeah.
I see this in a lot of aging societies. Well, I guess if you take a step back and think about, okay, in 2000 and after World War II, there's been a generation that has been completely wiped out, right? Not completely, but a lot of people have died. And what happened during those times after that is that you have less people who are older, and you have this baby boomers who are as a population much bigger, and they start from scratch basically, especially like in countries like Japan or Europe where it's been devastated, and they start to generate like new ideas, new business, new industries, etc. And you have this like powerful economic force that's rising, right? But now if you look at countries as the ones that I just mentioned, is that you have this massive drag of really, I guess, older, the baby boomer generation that are retired, and basically, and just saying no offense to any people in this generation, but they are sucking up a lot of social security costs, and even with the families that have their grandparents and etc. are a massive weight on the economic viability of the country itself. So if people actually live longer like that, then everybody is going to be, basically what I'm trying to say is like, if you live that long, how long can you continue being economically active as a human being, right? Because you have these generations that are young, willing to do things, willing to, or maybe they have desires or material desires or whatever it is that they strive to make more money and keep the economy active so that they can support their families, younger families. But if you could live as long as you want, wouldn't that cause a economic disaster because nobody really cares to, create economic activity?
Yeah. And I think if let's say the baby boomers now are 60 to 65 years old, and let's say in 20 years you could stop aging. Now that's probably not going to happen. I would say it's more like 50 to 100 years. But anyway, let's say in 20 years they could stop aging. Now, like you say, that demographic huge section of people, 60, 65, now they're 80, and then you lock them in at 80, the healthcare system would have a huge strain on it, I think. And like you say, would they be able to economically contribute? Sort of like my character, Jesus, who was locked in at 78 and didn't really much enjoy it, get much out of that. So, yeah, it depends on demographics. It depends on timing. But then again, if you can reverse aging, then maybe we could solve all of that, with going a little one step further, reversing. And there's research going on right now on reversing aging. It's fascinating. The one David Sinclair from Harvard University, Stephen Horvath from UC LA, and also Shinya Yamanaka from Kyoto University. They've all found ways, not in humans yet, but except for Yamanaka, I think he did use humans, to stop and even reverse the biological clock.
That's interesting, because when I watched, this is kind of trivial, but when I watched this movie called Benjamin Button, I thought how wonderful it would be if I could just start out as a baby, get old, and then go right back to being a baby again, and kind of use that life experience when in the first version of your life, and then redo it better as you actually age younger. And that would be a really interesting life to have, actually, which I wouldn't mind, getting a CRISPR done on me to, do it all over again. But, I personally do want to I don't want to say I want to die, but like I just want to know that there is a end to my life, so I just want to make it as good as possible, right? And I'm kind of in kind of the belief that this body is just a vessel, right? I mean, to me, I feel like you can live forever, and maybe not in this body, but maybe in some types of forms later on in life. And it's just, this is my just journey in this vessel at the moment, but it may be sometime in the future or even the past, maybe I can relive a different life, and it's kind of maybe up to, I don't know, maybe up to me at that point what kind of life that I want to enjoy. So I don't particularly feel like I need to live in this body particularly forever. Well, thank you very much for your conversation. It was really wonderful, and I really enjoyed reading your book, Age Decoded. I wish a lot of people out there would try to read this book and kind of think about what are the ethical values of having a finite life. This is something that I really want to extend the topics and talk about it a lot more in the future. But Mark, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Taka, for having me on your show, Future Design. I really enjoyed it, and all the best continuing forward.
Hi, this is your host Takatoshi Shibayama. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Now, if you enjoyed or disliked this show, please let me know by writing in the comment section. The only way I can improve or add value to you is through your voices. If there are any topics that you would like me to pick up, please also let me know in the comments. I'd love to start chatting with you all. And if you would like to continue watching the show, please subscribe. Thank you.